My son didn't pull me aside. He didn't lower his voice or wait for the music to swell or for the room to thin out. He hit me in front of 400 people because someone said I had eaten too much at his wedding. There are moments that don't feel real while you're inside them, not because they move too fast, but because something in you refuses to accept that the people you built your life around could choose a moment like that, a room like that, to show you exactly what you mean to them. I remember the sound more than anything else, not the music or the voices, but the silence that came after. The kind that spreads across a room when something crosses a line no one thought would ever be crossed in public. My name is Harold Whitaker. I'm 68 years old, and I spent most of my life believing that if you kept showing up for people, if you carried what needed to be carried without making noise about it, eventually it would count for something. That night, I learned it does count, just not in the way you think. Before we continue, after you like and leave a comment, I truly hope something good finds you this week. Maybe a quiet moment of peace, or someone finally treating you with the respect you deserve. And tell me, how old are you and where are you listening from tonight? What time is it for you right now? Let's continue. The venue was called the Glass Orchard, the kind of place built to look effortless and expensive at the same time, all white beams and tall windows, and soft golden lights hanging from the ceiling like they had something to prove. I stood outside a little longer than I needed to, adjusting the cuff of a suit that used to fit me better, one I hadn't worn in years because there hadn't been many places left that required it, and fewer still that I felt invited to. The fabric hung loose at my shoulders. I had lost weight over the past year, not in a way people compliment, not with discipline or intention, but in the quiet way that happens when meals become something you forget about because no one is waiting for you to sit down. I told myself it didn't matter, that I would eat at the reception, that there would be more than enough food inside for everyone. That's what I told myself. That morning, I had been under my daughter's kitchen sink, lying on cold tile with a wrench digging into my palm, trying to stop a leak that had been there long enough to leave a dark stain in the wood. Her husband had said he would take a look at it 3 weeks ago, the same way people say things when they don't expect to be the ones who actually follow through. And when I finished, when the pipe finally held and the dripping stopped, she thanked me without looking up from her phone, her voice distracted, already moving on to whatever came next. I remember standing up too fast, my knee catching on the cabinet door, and for a second I had to steady myself against the counter because the room tilted just enough to remind me that I wasn't as strong as I used to be. No one noticed, or maybe they did, and it just didn't matter enough to say anything. I drove home after that, changed into the suit, looked at myself in the mirror longer than I expected to, not checking how I looked, but trying to see if I still recognized the man standing there. Then I picked up my keys, ignored the soft grinding sound when I pressed the brake, and drove to my son's wedding. Inside, everything was already in motion. Waiters moved between tables like they had rehearsed it for weeks. Guests leaned into conversations that sounded easy and light, the kind of laughter that comes from knowing you belong somewhere. I stood near the entrance for a moment, not sure if I was waiting for someone to notice me or hoping no one would. There was a seating chart by the door. I walked over to it slowly, scanning the names, row after row of people who seemed to have been placed exactly where they were meant to be. It took me longer than it should have to find mine. Harold Whitaker, table 18, back corner. I looked at the other names at the table. I didn't recognize any of them. When I turned, a couple brushed past me without a word, the woman laughing at something I hadn't heard, the man adjusting his tie like he was used to being seen. No one asked if I needed help. No one asked if I had found my seat. Elliot saw me eventually. Not right away. Not the way a son looks for his father on a day like that. When he did, it was quick almost accidental, like noticing something slightly out of place. He walked over, straightening his jacket, his eyes already moving past me before he stopped. "You made it," he said. It wasn't relief. It wasn't warmth. It was acknowledgement. "I said I would," I told him, keeping my voice even, because I had learned a long time ago that tone matters more than truth in moments like these. He nodded once, then glanced over his shoulder toward the front of the room, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel like what he was about to say mattered. "Just don't make things awkward tonight, okay?" For a second, I thought I had misheard him. "I never do," I said. Vanessa joined us then, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her smile already in place before she even looked at me, the kind of smile that photographs well and means very little. "Harold," she said, "we're so glad you could come." It sounded right. It looked right. It didn't feel right. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied. And I meant that, even if I wasn't sure anymore whether I had been expected to. The ceremony passed in a blur of words I couldn't hold on to, vows that sounded beautiful without staying with me. And when it ended, when people stood and clapped and moved toward the reception area, I followed, because that's what you do when you've spent a lifetime learning how not to interrupt the way things are supposed to go. Table 18 was exactly where I thought it would be. Back corner. Close enough to see everything, far enough that no one had to see me. There were 6 chairs at the table, 4 of them filled quickly by people who seemed to know each other, their conversations picking up as if they had only been paused, not started. 1 seat remained empty across from me. The last chair was mine. No one introduced themselves. No one asked who I was. At one point, a woman at the table leaned toward the man beside her and said something quietly, both of them glancing in my direction for just a second before continuing their conversation like I wasn't there at all. I sat with my hands folded in my lap for a while, then rested them on the table, then picked up the water glass just to have something to do with them. I hadn't eaten all day. Not on purpose, not to prove anything. The day had simply filled itself with other people's needs, and by the time I had a moment to think about it, there wasn't time left. So I waited. Plates began appearing at other tables first. Laughter didn't pause. Conversations didn't slow. The room moved around me like I was sitting just outside of it. When a waiter finally approached our table, he hesitated, just for a second. His eyes moved from the place settings to the people sitting there, then to me, then back again, like he was trying to match something that didn't quite line up. "Sir, this seat?" he asked quietly, not unkindly, but not confidently either. I nodded. "Yes." He placed the plate in front of me. I thanked him. The food was still warm. I picked up my fork slowly, not because I was trying to savor it, but because it had been a while since I had eaten something that felt like a real meal, something that wasn't rushed, something that didn't come out of a container or get eaten standing up. The first bite was small. The second wasn't. By the third, I wasn't thinking about anything else. Not the room, not the table, not the distance between where I sat and where I was supposed to be. Just the food. Just the fact that I was finally eating. For a moment, it felt simple, human. I didn't notice when someone across the room started looking in my direction. I didn't notice when a waiter leaned toward another, speaking quietly, their eyes shifting toward table 18. What I didn't know, not yet, was that the plate in front of me had been meant for someone else, someone important enough that their absence had already been noticed, someone seated much closer to the front, where the lights were brighter and the attention stayed longer. And in a room like that, something small doesn't stay small for long. By the time I looked up, I could feel it. The shift. The way the conversations near me thinned out just slightly. The way attention began to gather without anyone saying a word. I followed it. And that's when I saw him. Elliot. Walking toward me. Not smiling. Not confused. Not surprised. And for the first time that night, I realized he wasn't coming to talk. I didn't plan to go to the wedding hungry. That's the part people don't understand when they try to make it sound like I walked in there looking for something to take. Like I saw a table, saw a plate, and thought, mine. That wasn't it. That's never been how I've lived my life. The truth is a lot smaller than that. A lot quieter. I hadn't eaten since the morning, and even then it was just half a piece of toast I left on the counter because the phone rang. And once the phone starts ringing in this family, it doesn't really stop. Not in the way people imagine, but in the way things pile up until you forget what you were doing before. Elliot needed help with the insurance paperwork again, the same forms I'd already explained twice, the same numbers circled in red pen because he said it made it easier to see things clearly. And I drove over because it's faster than trying to explain over the phone, and because I've learned that if I don't go, something gets missed, and if something gets missed, it somehow comes back to me anyway. On the way back, Evelyn called, her voice soft in that practiced way she has when she's about to ask for something she's already decided I'll say yes to. And she said the florist had messed up the delivery time, and could I stop by the venue just to check if the arrangements were set up properly? Just a quick look, nothing big, just so she wouldn't have to worry. Just so she wouldn't have to worry. I remember standing there in that reception hall hours before anyone arrived, adjusting flowers I didn't order, straightening chairs I wouldn't sit in, checking names on place cards I hadn't been asked about, moving quietly like I had always done, like I was part of the structure of the day, but not part of the day itself. Nobody tells you when you become that person. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small things. You carry a box here, fix a hinge there, drive someone somewhere, cover a bill because it's easier than arguing. And then, one day, you realize the entire system runs a little smoother because you're in it, but no one actually sees you inside it. By the time I got home to change, it was already late, and I didn't feel hungry in that sharp, urgent way. Just that dull, steady hollow you get when your body's been waiting too long and doesn't expect anything anymore. I thought there'd be time at the reception. There's always food at a wedding. That's what I told myself while I buttoned my shirt, the same one I'd worn to Elliot's graduation years ago. The collar just slightly worn on one side, something only I would notice. And I looked in the mirror longer than I usually do. Not because I thought I looked good, but because I was trying to figure out if I looked like someone who belonged in the room I was about to walk into. I didn't have an answer for that. The reception was already full when I arrived. Laughter carrying across the room, glasses clinking, people leaning into each other like they'd always known exactly where they fit. I stood there for a moment at the edge, letting my eyes adjust, trying to place faces, trying to find something familiar that would tell me where to go. No one waved. No one came over. And that's fine. That happens at big events. People get caught up. They get busy. I told myself that, too. I found my seat eventually, or at least the seat with my name on it. And even that felt like something I had to confirm twice, running my finger over the printed letters like they might disappear if I looked away too quickly. Harold. Just the name. No dad. No father of the groom. Just Harold. I sat down slowly, adjusting the napkin in my lap like I'd seen people do 1,000 times, trying to move like I belonged there, trying not to feel like I'd slipped into someone else's place by accident. The speeches started before I really noticed the food. That's the strange part. Hunger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just sits in the background, steady and patient, waiting for a moment when you're not paying attention. The plate was already there when I looked down. I didn't see who placed it. I didn't see when it arrived. 1 second, the table was just tablecloth and glassware, and the next, there it was, warm, real. Something that existed in a way the rest of the night didn't quite feel like it did for me. I remember hesitating. Not long, just enough for a thought to pass through my mind. Something small and uncertain, like maybe I should wait. Maybe this wasn't mine. Maybe someone would come back for it. But no one did. Around me, people were eating, talking, laughing between bites, the kind of easy rhythm that comes from knowing exactly what's yours and never having to question it. So I picked up the fork. The first bite didn't feel like anything important. It didn't feel like a decision that would matter. It felt like what it was. A man who hadn't eaten all day finally letting his body catch up to the moment it was in. I didn't rush. I didn't hide it. I just ate. Not quickly, not greedily, just steadily. The way you do when you're trying to be respectful, trying to stay within the lines even when no one's drawn them clearly for you. Halfway through, I became aware of something shifting around me. Not a sound exactly, more like a change in the air. Conversations dipping just slightly, a pause that didn't belong to the flow of the room. I looked up. Across the table, someone had stopped mid-sentence. 2 seats down, a woman was glancing past me, not at me, but through me, like she was waiting for something to correct itself. That small thought from earlier came back, sharper this time. Maybe this isn't yours. I set the fork down, just for a second, just to think. And that's when I heard my name. Dad? Not loud, not a shout, but it cut through everything. I turned. Elliot was already walking toward me, not fast, not slow, but with a kind of control that felt worse than either. His jaw set in a way I hadn't seen since he was younger, when he'd get frustrated and try to hide it. Except this time he wasn't trying to hide anything. He stopped beside the table, looking down at the plate, then at me, then back at the plate again, like he was confirming something he already knew. You shouldn't be eating that. There are moments where you expect confusion, where you expect someone to laugh it off, to say it's a mix-up, to fix it before it becomes anything. This wasn't one of those moments. I felt the eyes before I saw them. People weren't talking anymore, not fully, just enough silence between words to let the moment stretch. I didn't realize, I started, already pushing the plate slightly away, already trying to correct something I didn't understand yet. That's not yours, he said, a little louder this time, not yelling, but enough that the people closest to us didn't have to pretend not to hear. I nodded, once, because what else do you do when something shifts under your feet and you're still trying to figure out where you're standing? I can move, I said quietly. It's fine. But he didn't answer that. He didn't look at me like I'd made a small mistake. He looked at me like I'd done something deliberate, something embarrassing. And that's when I noticed it. A phone, just off to the side, angled slightly toward the table. Someone holding it a little too still. Not eating, not talking, just watching, recording. And in that moment, with the room holding its breath in that polite, uncomfortable way people do when they're close enough to something, but don't want to be part of it, I realized something that had nothing to do with the plate in front of me. This wasn't about food. It wasn't even about a mistake. It was about how easily a man can become a problem in a room he helped build, just by being seen in the wrong way at the wrong time. Elliot leaned in slightly, his voice lower now, but sharper. Do you have any idea how this looks? And the way he said it, the way his eyes didn't soften, didn't question, didn't wait. It didn't feel like he was trying to fix anything. It felt like he had already decided what I was. Elliot didn't raise his voice right away. That was the first thing that made it worse, not better. If he had come in loud, if he had snapped immediately, people might have dismissed it as stress, as nerves, as a groom losing his balance for a second under the weight of a big day. But he didn't. He stood there beside the table with a kind of quiet control that didn't belong to the moment, one hand resting lightly against the back of the empty chair across from me. His posture straight, composed, like he was about to correct something small before it became a problem. Up close, I could see it clearly. He wasn't confused. He wasn't asking. He had already decided. "Do you know who that plate was for?" he asked, his voice low enough that only the people closest could hear, but not low enough to hide it. I shook my head. "No, the waiter made a mistake," he said, cutting through the sentence cleanly, like he had been waiting for that exact explanation and had already rejected it before I finished. "And you didn't think to stop him?" There was no room in the way he said it for anything but agreement. "I didn't know," I replied, keeping my voice steady, careful, because something in the air had shifted and I could feel it pressing in from all sides now. "I thought it was mine. I'm seated here." A pause followed, but it wasn't empty. It filled quickly with attention. At the table next to us, a woman lowered her fork but didn't set it down. 2 seats behind Elliot, a man leaned slightly to the side, just enough to get a clearer view without turning his head fully. Across the room, I noticed a phone lift a little higher, the angle adjusting, steadying, recording. Elliot exhaled slowly through his nose, a tight sound that didn't quite qualify as a laugh. "That's not how this works," he said. Behind him, Vanessa had stopped moving entirely. Her glass hovered near her chest, untouched, her expression fixed in something that looked calm from a distance but felt sharp up close, like she was measuring the moment instead of reacting to it. Someone near her leaned in and whispered something. I didn't hear the words. I didn't need to. I saw the way Elliot's jaw tightened when it reached him. "Dad," he said again, and the word felt heavier this time. Not warmer, not closer, just heavier, like it came with a responsibility I had already failed to carry. "That plate was from Mr. Callahan." The name landed differently in the space between us. It meant something to him. It didn't mean anything to me. "I'll move," I said immediately, pushing my chair back just enough that it scraped lightly against the floor, the sound cutting sharper than I expected through the growing quiet. "I'll let them fix it." But he didn't step aside. If anything, he closed the distance. "It's not about moving now," he replied. "It's about the fact that you're sitting here, eating something that wasn't meant for you, in front of people who notice that kind of thing." A murmur moved through the nearby tables, low and quick, like a ripple that didn't want to be seen but couldn't stay still. I became aware again of the room, not just as a space, as an audience. "I didn't realize," I said, softer now, because it felt like the only direction left to go, smaller, quieter, less visible. "I'll apologize." "For what?" he asked, his voice tightening slightly. "For taking it? Or for not thinking about how it looks?" The question hung there, heavier than it should have been. Someone let out a short, uncomfortable laugh a few tables away, the kind people make when they're not sure whether something is serious or not, when they're waiting to see which direction it turns. A waiter paused mid-step nearby, holding a tray slightly higher than necessary, his eyes flicking between us before he quickly looked away again. "I'll go talk to them," I said, trying to stand, trying to end it before it stretched any further. Elliot's hand came down on the table. Not a slam, not loud, but enough to stop me. "Just sit," he said. The word wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. Everything around us had already quieted enough that it carried. "You don't get it," he continued, and now there was no effort to keep it contained, no attempt to soften the edges. "You don't get that this—" He gestured toward the plate, toward the table, toward me. "This reflects on me." There it was again. Not the mistake, the image of it. I felt something settle inside me then, something steady and tired, like a weight finally finding its place. "I'm not trying to reflect anything," I said. "I was just eating." "You were just helping yourself," he shot back, louder now, the restraint slipping. "Like you always do." That word again. Always. It didn't belong here, but he said it like it had been waiting for a long time. "This isn't about the plate," I said quietly. For a moment I thought he might stop. I thought something in that sentence might reach him. But instead his expression hardened further, like I had just confirmed exactly what he believed. "Of course it's about the plate," he said. "What else would it be about?" Behind him, Vanessa stepped closer, her voice low but urgent now. "Elliot," she said, "people are watching." He didn't turn. "I know," he replied, and something about the way he said it, flat, certain, shifted the moment from something that might still be contained into something that had already decided to happen. "I said I'd fix it," I told him, one last time, not because I believed it would change anything, but because I needed to say it. Needed to give whatever this was one last chance to be smaller. He shook his head. "No," he said. "You already made it worse." "I ate half a plate of food," I replied, the words coming out more plainly than I intended, stripped of the careful tone I had been holding on to. "That's all that happened." "That's not all that happened," he said, his voice rising now, clear enough that conversations further out began to stop entirely. "You embarrassed me." The room reacted to that, not loudly, but visibly. Heads turned fully now, chairs angled, phones lifted higher, no longer pretending. I felt every eye on me. "I didn't come here to embarrass you," I said, and this time the words carried something else, something worn down over time. "I came because I'm your father." The word landed, but not the way I had hoped. Elliot let out a short laugh, not amused, not kind, just enough. "That's exactly the problem," he said. For a second, everything held. The air, the room, the moment. And in that pause, I saw it clearly. This wasn't about food. This wasn't about a mistake. This was about a version of me he had already decided didn't belong here. Then someone behind him said, just loud enough to carry, "Is that the groom's dad?" Another voice answered, quieter, but not quiet enough. "Yeah, I think so." And something in Elliot snapped. Not suddenly, not wildly, just enough. He stepped closer, closer than he needed to, and his hand came up. For a fraction of a second, my mind tried to correct it, tried to turn the motion into something smaller, something explainable, a gesture, a point, a push. But it didn't stop. It didn't slow. And when it hit, it was clean, sharp. The sound cut through the room in a way nothing else had that night. Louder, not because of force, but because of what it meant. Everything stopped. Forks hovered in midair. Glasses paused inches from lips. 400 people, suddenly still, suddenly present, suddenly aware that something had just happened that couldn't be folded back into the evening. My head turned with the impact, then back again. I didn't fall. I stayed in the chair, my hand resting against the edge of the table, steadying myself against something solid, something real. I tasted metal. Somewhere behind Elliot, Vanessa's hand flew up to her mouth. "Oh my God," someone whispered. The phone was still there, closer now, steadier, capturing everything. Elliot didn't move right away. He stood there, his chest rising slightly faster now, his hand still lifted for a second longer than it should have been, like his body hadn't caught up to what it had just done. Then, slowly, he lowered it. No apology, no explanation. Just that small, quiet motion. Around us, the room didn't return to normal. It held, uncertain, uncomfortable, watching. And in that silence, with 400 people seeing me not as a father, not as a guest, but as a moment, I realized something I hadn't let myself see before. This wasn't where it started. This was just the first time. It happened where everyone could see it. The sound didn't come from the punch. It came from the room. A kind of silence that doesn't exist in normal life, the kind that only shows up when something crosses a line no one thought would be crossed in public, when a moment that was supposed to be soft and forgettable suddenly becomes something people will talk about on the drive home, something they'll replay later in bed, wondering if they should have said something, wondering if they were wrong for just watching. 400 people, and not a single fork touched a plate. I didn't fall, not completely, but my balance shifted just enough that my hand hit the edge of the table, fingers brushing against the white cloth that had been ironed that morning, still crisp, still pretending this was a celebration. My glass tipped, rolled, and shattered on the floor, the sound sharper than the hit itself, like punctuation no one asked for. For a second, I thought someone would step in, not to defend me, I'm not naive like that anymore, but at least to soften it, to turn it into something smaller, something manageable. A laugh, a quick apology, a hand on Elliot's shoulder telling him to take a breath. No one moved. Not really. What they did instead was worse. A woman 2 tables over leaned slightly toward the man beside her, her hand half covering her mouth, whispering something I couldn't hear but didn't need to. A young server froze mid-step, tray still in his hands, eyes flicking between me and Elliot like he was trying to understand if this was part of the event or something he should report. Somewhere behind me, someone let out a quiet, uncomfortable laugh that died halfway through, like even they realized too late what it sounded like. That was the moment it changed. Not when he hit me. When people started deciding what this meant. I tasted something metallic at the back of my mouth, and it took me a second to realize it was blood. Just a little, nothing dramatic, but enough to ground me in my own body again. My jaw ached, not in a sharp way, but in that dull, spreading kind of pain that settles in slowly, like it plans to stay. Elliot was still standing in front of me, chest rising, shoulders tight, his hand half curled like it hadn't decided yet whether it was finished. For a brief second, something flickered across his face. Not guilt, not even anger anymore, just calculation. Like he was already thinking 3 steps ahead about how this would look, how this would be explained. Vanessa stepped in then, but not toward me. She reached for him. "Elliot," she said under her breath, her voice tight but controlled, her fingers wrapping around his arm like she was anchoring him, not stopping him. "Not here. Not here. Not, don't do that. Not, what are you doing? Just, not here." Evelyn was the one who looked at me, and the look wasn't shock. It was irritation. A small crease between her eyebrows, the kind she used to get when I tracked mud into the house or forgot to take out the trash on time, like I had somehow made this situation inconvenient for her, Like the problem wasn't what happened, but that it happened in front of people who mattered. "Frank," she said quietly, but not quietly enough, her voice carrying just enough to reach the edges of the nearby tables. "You could have just waited." Waited. I looked at her for a moment, really looked, and in that second, I remembered something so small it almost didn't belong in a night like this. The way I had been in Elliot's kitchen that morning, standing over a leaking sink, my hands wet, tools spread out on the counter while he rushed past me without stopping, saying something about being late, about trusting me to lock up when I was done. I had fixed it. Of course I had. I always did. And now I was standing in his wedding, blood in my mouth, and the only thing my wife could think to say was that I should have waited. Something in me didn't break. It didn't shatter, didn't explode, didn't even crack in any way that would make a sound. It just moved. Like a weight shifting from one side to the other after being held too long in the wrong position. I straightened slowly, not in a dramatic way, just enough to stand fully upright again, my hand leaving the edge of the table, my balance returning piece by piece. I reached for a napkin, the kind folded into a neat triangle, and pressed it lightly against my lip, more out of habit than necessity. No one stepped forward. No one said my name, but I could feel them now. All of them. Not just as a blur of faces, but as attention, focused and quiet, and waiting. Phones were no longer being hidden. A few were raised, not boldly, not yet, but enough. Enough to record, enough to remember. I had spent years making sure nothing in this family ever reached this point. Handling things privately, paying quietly, fixing what needed fixing before anyone else could see it was broken. I thought that was what a man was supposed to do, what a father was supposed to do, what a husband owed the people who depended on him. Standing there, with the taste of iron still lingering and my son's handprint warming my cheek, I realized something I should have understood a long time ago. Privacy had never protected me. It had protected them. Elliot shifted his weight, glancing around now, finally noticing the room, the eyes, the silence that hadn't gone away. His confidence didn't disappear, not completely, but it changed shape, pulling inward, tightening. Vanessa leaned closer to him, whispering something I couldn't hear, but I saw the way his jaw set afterward, the way he nodded once, like they had already agreed on a version of the story that would make this easier to carry. Evelyn crossed her arms, not defensive, closed, like she was already done with this, already waiting for it to pass so the night could go back to what it was supposed to be. I looked at all of them, one by one, not searching for anything anymore, not expecting anything to shift or soften or come back, just seeing them, clearly. For the first time in a long time. I lowered the napkin, folded it once without thinking, and set it carefully on the table beside the broken glass, like it still mattered how things looked, like some part of me hadn't caught up yet. Then I reached into my jacket. Not quickly, not slowly either, just deliberately. My fingers brushed against the small notebook I'd started carrying months ago, the one that had begun as a way to remember appointments and turned into something else entirely, something heavier, something I hadn't had a name for until now. I didn't take it out, not yet, but I felt it there, and that was enough. Around us, the room was still holding its breath, waiting for the next move, waiting for someone to speak, to apologize, to explain, to fix. I had spent years being that person, the one who stepped in, the one who smoothed things over, the one who made sure no one else had to sit with the consequences of what they had done. I looked at Elliot one last time, really looked this time, Not at the version of him I had carried in my head for years, but the man standing in front of me, breathing hard, eyes sharp, already halfway out of the moment he had created. And I understood something with a kind of calm that felt almost foreign. They thought this was the worst part, the hit, the silence, the eyes. They were wrong. This was just the first moment I stopped protecting them. I didn't pull the notebook out in the ballroom, not yet. There are moments when doing something too soon makes it look like anger, and I had spent too many years being misread to give them that advantage now. If I opened it there, if I held it up with my lips still bleeding and 400 people breathing through the silence, they would have called it bitterness. They would have said I came prepared to ruin the wedding. They would have said an old man got embarrassed and reached for whatever he could use as a weapon. So I left it in my jacket. For the first time that night, I let the silence do the work. Elliot was still watching me, but differently now. Not with authority. Not with the confidence of a son correcting an old father who had overstepped. His eyes had started moving too much. First to Vanessa, then to Evelyn, then to the raised phones, then back to me, like a man trying to locate the safest exit in a room that had suddenly changed shape. My cheek burned. My mouth tasted like metal. And under my fingers, behind the lining of my jacket, that little notebook sat against my ribs like a second heartbeat. I remember thinking, not in words exactly, just in that quiet way thoughts settle when you finally stop arguing with them, that if a man spends long enough being useful without being seen, he starts to disappear in ways that don't leave a trace anyone else can point to later. And maybe that's why nobody in that room looked surprised to see me standing there, like something that didn't quite belong in the picture. I looked down at the broken glass on the floor. A server had come closer with a broom and dustpan, then stopped when Evelyn lifted one hand, not toward me, not toward Elliot, but toward him, as if even cleaning up the evidence of the moment needed her permission. The young man hesitated, then shifted his grip on the broom, eyes flicking toward me for a second before dropping again. And when he finally took a step closer, it wasn't careful in the way you move around someone hurt. It was careful in the way you move around something that might cause trouble if you get too involved. He swept the glass in slow, deliberate strokes, not looking at me, not speaking, just removing the mess. That, more than anything, reminded me of work. Not family. Work. For 38 years, I had lived in rooms where people smiled too much when the numbers didn't match. I had sat across from men in pressed shirts and polished shoes while they explained missing funds as timing issues, reporting delays, harmless rounding errors. I had watched executives laugh over catered lunches while hiding things in spreadsheets they assumed no one would read closely enough to challenge. But I read everything. That was what my family forgot. Before I was the old man at table 18, before I was the retired father who fixed sinks and mailed tax forms and drove grandchildren to orthodontist appointments, I was the person companies called when something smelled wrong, but nobody wanted to say fraud out loud. I had been an internal auditor for Hollis and Vale Logistics, a company that moved more freight across the country than most people could imagine. Warehouses, ports, invoices, fuel contracts, vendor relationships, insurance claims, all of it running through systems so large that a dishonest person could hide inside them for years if no one knew where to look. I knew where to look. Not because I was brilliant in the flashy way people admire at dinner parties. I was never that. I didn't speak in clever lines or dominate rooms. I was quiet, patient, annoyingly thorough, according to one regional director who eventually resigned after I found 3 shell vendors tied to his brother-in-law. My skill was simple. I noticed what people hoped would remain boring. A receipt submitted twice with a different invoice number, A vendor paid every third Friday instead of monthly. A signature that changed pressure halfway through a line. Fuel purchases that made sense on paper until you compared them against weather reports and route logs. I built cases out of things other people found too dull to question. That was how I became valuable. Not loved, not admired. Valuable. There is a difference, and I learned it early. At work, they respected me because they had to. At home, they used the same patience, the same memory, the same attention to detail, and called it being helpful. Evelyn used to introduce me as good with paperwork, as if I spent nearly 4 decades protecting companies from theft because I had neat handwriting and liked filing cabinets. Elliot once joked at Thanksgiving that I could make a grocery receipt feel like a federal investigation. And everyone laughed, including me, because back then I still thought laughing with them meant I was included. I wasn't. I was being made smaller in a language polite enough to pass for affection. Standing in that ballroom, with my son's handprint warming my face, I remembered the first time Elliot brought me his company books. He was 29, too proud to ask directly, so he came through the side door, the way my children always did when they needed something they didn't want to name as help. He arrived at my house with a laptop under one arm and 2 coffees in a cardboard tray, one black for me, one sweet enough to smell like dessert for him. He set both on the kitchen table and said, "Dad, can you just take a quick look at something?" Just a quick look. That phrase had cost me more hours than any job I ever held. His startup was called Meridian Bridge, a consulting firm that promised supply chain optimization to mid-sized manufacturers, though at the time it was mostly Elliot, 2 overworked analysts, and a pitch deck full of words investors liked. He had charm, I'll give him that. He could talk about growth and disruption and scaling operations in a way that made people lean forward, even when the numbers underneath were still thin. I didn't build it for him. That would be too clean a lie. But I steadied it. I cleaned up vendor reports, corrected tax classifications, found the expense leaks, rewrote the way he tracked receivables, flagged contracts that would have strangled him 6 months later. I explained cash flow 3 different ways before he finally stopped confusing revenue with money he could spend. I sat with him late at night while Evelyn slept upstairs, both of us under the yellow kitchen light, his laptop fan humming, my old reading glasses sliding down my nose. I should have charged him. I should have said no. I didn't. When Meridian Bridge landed its first major client, Elliot thanked Vanessa publicly at the launch dinner, though they had only been dating for 4 months. He thanked his team. He thanked his investors. He thanked everyone who believed. I was sitting 2 tables away. He didn't mention me. Evelyn squeezed my knee under the table and whispered, "Don't be sensitive. This is his moment." So I wasn't. That had been my great talent as a father, not being sensitive. Not when he forgot. Not when he dismissed. Not when he called at 10:43 p.m. because a lender wanted clarification on collateral language, and he didn't know where the original file was. Not when he asked me to review contracts and then told people he had negotiated them himself. Not when Evelyn said, "Your father likes feeling useful," as if usefulness was a hobby and not the only chair they ever saved for me. I let it go, again and again, because that is what families teach quiet men to call love. But the notebook remembered. At first, it was just dates and reminders, then mileage, then payments, then names of people Elliot said he had spoken to when I knew he hadn't, then late fees I covered, then invoices I questioned, then vendor names that appeared once, disappeared, and returned months later with new addresses, but the same bank routing patterns. The first time I saw the name Callahan tied to Meridian Bridge, I didn't think much of it. Callahan Capital, a small private investment firm, polished website, clean language, the kind of company that liked words like legacy and partnership. They were one of the reasons tonight's wedding looked the way it did. Mr. Callahan was not just a guest whose dinner plate had gone missing. He was money. He was reputation. He was the kind of man Elliot needed smiling near the front table. And that was why the plate mattered. Not because I had eaten it. Because Mr. Callahan had noticed. Because if Mr. Callahan noticed the wrong thing, he might start noticing other things too. I looked toward the front of the room. Mr. Callahan stood near his chair, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that looked expensive without trying to prove it. His face was unreadable, but his eyes weren't on the missing plate anymore. They were on Elliot, then on me. That was when I understood something else. The wedding was not just a wedding. It was a performance for investors, clients, family, friends, and people whose approval could turn into money. Vanessa's flowers, Evelyn's seating chart, Elliot's perfect posture, the speeches no one had given yet. All of it was part of the same machine, and I had disrupted it by bleeding. Evelyn moved closer to me, her heels clicking softly against the floor, her voice low enough to sound private and sharp enough to cut. "Go clean yourself up," she said. "Then come back and sit quietly." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, because she still thought she was giving instructions to the man who fixed things after everyone else broke them. I looked at her, then at Elliot, then at Vanessa standing beside him like a beautiful locked door. "No," I said. Just that. No. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But it reached the people nearest us, and I saw it land on Evelyn's face like a slap she could not return. Her eyes narrowed. "Harold?" I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket and finally touched the notebook again. Not pulling it out, just letting them see that my hand was there. Elliot's gaze dropped. For one small second, he recognized the shape of it. He knew that notebook. He had mocked it once, called it my little old man ledger, while asking me to find a payment record he had misplaced. Now, he stared at my pocket like it had teeth. And for the first time, he wasn't looking at me like his father. He was trying to remember what I knew. Elliot's eyes stayed on my jacket pocket longer than they should have. That was how I knew. Not because he said anything, not because he stepped back or changed his tone or asked what I had written down. Men like my son, men who have built entire lives around looking certain, don't show fear the way honest people do. They don't tremble. They don't admit they're afraid. They calculate. They measure distance. They search for the one thing in the room that might still be controlled. And in that moment, the one thing he wanted to control was my notebook. I kept my hand inside my jacket, fingers resting against the worn cover, feeling the softened corners, the faint bend in the spine from years of being carried in coat pockets, glove compartments, kitchen drawers, wherever I needed it to be close enough to trust. It was nothing special to look at. Brown cover, elastic strap, cheap paper that bled a little if I used the wrong pen. But it remembered more than my family wanted remembered. Evelyn noticed his stare. Of course she did. My wife had always been good at noticing danger when it threatened the version of life she wanted to keep polished. She missed plenty of other things. The way my hands shook after too much coffee and too little food. The way I stayed in the garage 10 minutes longer than necessary before coming inside. The way I stopped offering opinions at dinner because they were never received as anything except inconvenience. But threat? Reputation? Exposure? She could smell those from across a room. "Harold," she said, softer this time, careful now. "Put your hand down." I looked at her, not angrily, almost curiously. Because after 39 years of marriage, After 2 children, a mortgage, surgeries, funerals, broken appliances, holidays, canceled plans, and all the small daily negotiations that make up a life, she still believed the correct tone could move me back into place. "Why?" I asked. It was such a simple question that it seemed to disturb her more than if I had shouted. Her lips parted, then closed. Vanessa stepped slightly behind Elliot, one hand still touching his sleeve, not gripping now, just resting there, reminding him without words that he needed to look wounded, not guilty. Mr. Callahan remained near the front table, watching with the stillness of a man who had made money by not interrupting people before they revealed themselves. And the phones stayed up. That mattered. Somewhere to my left, a woman leaned closer to her friend and whispered, not quite quiet enough, "He's the father, right? Why would he do this here?" The friend shook her head, eyes flicking toward me and then away, as if looking too long might pull her into it. A server passed behind me, carrying a tray of fresh plates, and slowed just enough to angle his body away from me, not to avoid bumping into me, but to avoid being associated with whatever I had become in that moment. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it stayed. Elliot swallowed. I saw it. A tiny movement in his throat, quick and controlled, but there. "Dad," he said, lowering his voice again, trying to return us to the private language families use when they want the public to believe everything is fine. "Let's not do this here." That would have worked on me once. It had worked many times. In hospital waiting rooms, in bank offices, in parking lots after Thanksgiving dinners where Evelyn said something cruel and Elliot asked me not to make it a thing. In the hallway outside Claire's house when her husband forgot to repay me for the water heater, and everyone acted as if mentioning money made me cheap instead of honest. Let's not do this here. A sentence made of fog, a way to postpone truth until it died somewhere private. I let my hand remain where it was. "I have done almost everything privately," I said. The words were not loud, but they moved. I could feel them move through the tables closest to us, people leaning in without meaning to, their faces changing with the quiet recognition that this was no longer about a plate. Elliot's expression tightened. "This is not the time," he said. "No," I answered. "It may be the first honest time we've had." Something crossed his face then, sharp and quick. Anger, yes, but beneath it, alarm. Because he knew what honest meant when I said it. For years, Elliot had treated my attention like a tool he could borrow and insult in the same breath. He mocked the way I kept receipts, then called me when the bank asked for proof of payment. He rolled his eyes when I asked for dates, then needed me to reconstruct a timeline he had never bothered to preserve. He laughed at my folders, my labels, my habit of writing the check number in the corner of every invoice before scanning it. Until the first lie. I still remember it. Not because it was large. The first lies rarely are. Large lies announce themselves. They come with too much confidence, too many explanations, too much decoration. The dangerous ones begin small, dull, easy to miss. They hide inside normal paperwork, because normal paperwork is where most people stop paying attention. It was a Tuesday in November, cold enough that the kitchen window fogged near the edges while Elliot sat at my table with his laptop open and his tie pulled loose. He had been at Meridian Bridge for nearly 3 years by then, long enough to call himself founder and CEO without laughing, long enough to have investors, payroll, clients, and a habit of speaking in numbers he didn't always understand. He wanted me to look over a vendor reconciliation. Just a quick look. Again.
He had brought takeout that night, soup in plastic containers, and a paper bag of rolls that went cold while we worked.
Evelyn walked through once, glanced at the laptop, and said, "Don't keep your father up too late," in a tone that made it sound like I was a sweet old man being indulged, instead of the only person in the house who knew what the spreadsheet actually meant. Elliot opened the file and pointed to a line item. "See, this is just a marketing partner," he said. "Nothing complicated." The vendor name was Northline Strategy. Clean name, generic, forgettable. Exactly the kind of name people use when they don't want curiosity attached to it. The invoice was for $28,000. That alone didn't bother me. Marketing could be expensive. Strategy could be expensive. Bad decisions were often expensive and perfectly legal. What bothered me was the date. The invoice had been issued on a Sunday, paid Monday morning, cleared before noon. No approval notes, no campaign reference, no deliverables attached, no contract link, no email chain. Nothing but a PDF with a logo sharp enough to look legitimate and empty enough to say nothing. I asked Elliot what Northline did. He said branding. I asked what branding. He said positioning. I asked what positioning. He leaned back and rubbed his eyes, already irritated. "Dad, this is why I don't show you things," he said. But he did show me things, because he needed me. That was the arrangement no one named. I didn't argue. I turned the laptop slightly, checked the payment details, then asked for the prior month's vendor export. He sighed like I had requested a kidney, but he sent it. Then the month before that, then 6 months, then 12. Northline appeared 4 times, different amounts, different descriptions, same routing pattern. Not identical, not foolishly identical, but close enough that an old man with tired eyes and 38 years of watching people hide money could feel the shape of it. I wrote the name down, Northline Strategy, then the dates, then the amounts. Elliot saw me writing and laughed under his breath. "There it is," he said, "the famous Harold Whittaker ledger." I didn't look up. "Do you know who owns this company?" I asked. "It's a vendor," he said. That wasn't my question. He was quiet for just a second too long. Not long enough for most people. Long enough for me. "I'd have to check," he said. He never did. So I did. Not that night. Not in front of him. I had learned, long before my family learned to underestimate me, that the first rule of finding the truth is not letting the liar know which thread you're pulling. Northline Strategy had been formed 8 months earlier in Delaware, with a registered agent address used by dozens of companies that existed mostly on paper. Its listed manager was another LLC. That LLC pointed to a mailbox in Ohio. The mailbox had been rented by a man named Peter Voss. I knew that name. Not from Elliot, from Vanessa. Peter Voss was Vanessa's cousin. He had stood at the rehearsal dinner with a drink in one hand, laughing too loudly at stories that weren't funny, telling everyone he was in consulting, while wearing shoes so new the soles still looked untouched. That was the first lie that made a sound. Quiet, small, but real. I didn't accuse Elliot then. I wrote it down. Because accusations disappear when families are good at denial. Records stay. After Northline came other names. Gray Harbor Media, Red Finch Advisory, Larchmont Procurement. Each one ordinary enough to bore a busy person, each one tied, after enough digging, to someone too close to Vanessa, too close to Elliot, too close to the clean little story they were building for investors. The money moved in amounts just below thresholds that required board notification. Not always. Not predictably. Smart enough to avoid looking patterned to someone careless. Not smart enough to avoid looking patterned to me. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one night after midnight, a grocery receipt from Evelyn's pharmacy run beside my elbow, cold coffee near my wrist, Meridian Bridge bank exports spread across the screen, while my knees ached from sitting too long. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator clicking on and off. I should have been in bed. I should have walked away months ago. I didn't. Back in the ballroom, Elliot was still looking at my pocket. He knew some of what was in there, not all. That was why he was afraid. Evelyn reached for my arm, then seemed to think better of it when she noticed the nearest phone following her hand. "Harold," she said, very softly now. "Whatever you think you know, this is not the place." I looked past her, at Vanessa, at Elliot, at Mr. Callahan watching from under the warm lights of a wedding that had begun to feel less like a celebration and more like a deposition no one had agreed to attend. "I don't think," I said. My voice felt steady, even if the rest of me didn't. "I know." Elliot's face shifted, just enough. I took my hand out of my jacket. Empty. The notebook stayed inside. Not yet. Let him wonder. Let him stand there in front of 400 people and try to decide which lie I had written down first. Because I didn't need the whole story. I already knew where to begin. I had learned a long time ago that silence bothers guilty people more than accusation ever could. An accusation gives a man something to fight, something he can push against, twist, deny, or dismiss as emotion. But silence leaves him alone with what he already knows. And most people who have spent years adjusting the truth are not nearly as comfortable with themselves as they pretend to be in public. So I said nothing at first. I stood there in the ballroom, my hand resting loosely at my side, the notebook still tucked inside my jacket like it had been all evening, and I watched my son try to measure the distance between what he thought I knew and what he was afraid I might say. Elliot didn't look scared in the way people expect fear to look. There was no shaking, no obvious panic, just a small tightening around his eyes, a hesitation that hadn't been there a few minutes ago. The kind that only shows up when a man realizes the situation has moved out of his control and into someone else's hands. He glanced past me once toward the exit, then toward Vanessa, then toward Mr. Callahan, and each glance told me more than any confession would have. Evelyn saw it too. Her voice softened when she spoke, which meant she wasn't calm. It meant she was calculating. "Harold," she said, almost gently now, as if lowering her tone might shrink the moment back down into something manageable. "You're tired. You've had a long day. Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be." I looked at her for a second. A long day. That was one way to say it. Under Claire's sink before noon, my knee pressed into cold tile while water soaked through an old towel that should have been replaced months ago. At the venue before the staff had finished setting the chairs, adjusting a crooked table that no one else had noticed. Sitting alone at table 18, eating slowly so it wouldn't look like I didn't belong there. Standing now, with dried blood at the corner of my mouth, while my own son tried to decide how to clean this up without letting it spread. Yes, it had been a long day. But long days had never been the problem. Being invisible inside them was. "I'm not turning it into anything," I said quietly. "I'm just not putting it away." The sentence didn't need volume. It landed anyway. Vanessa's fingers tightened around Elliot's sleeve, not dramatically, just enough to tell him she felt the shift too, the way the room had started leaning toward us instead of away. That was when Claire reached me. She moved quickly, but not with concern, not the kind that comes from worry, more the kind that comes from discomfort, from wanting something messy to become quiet again before anyone important noticed. "Dad," she said under her breath, her hand hovering near my arm but not quite touching me. "Please, not here." Not here. I had heard that my whole life. Not here meant later. Not here meant smaller. Not here meant somewhere they could explain it back to me until it no longer sounded like what actually happened. I looked at her and saw the morning again, the cabinet door hanging open, the smell of damp wood, the way she had said thank you without looking up from her phone while I tightened the pipe and wiped the water she hadn't bothered to notice spreading along the baseboard. "You called me at 7:12, I said. She blinked. "What?" "The sink," I said. "You said you didn't want guests seeing it tomorrow." Her face flushed, quick and uneven. "That's not what this is about." "It is," I said. "It's exactly what this is about." She didn't answer. She didn't argue. She just looked away, and that was enough. Evelyn stepped forward before the silence could settle. "Harold," she said, sharper now, "stop keeping score." For a second, something inside me almost laughed. Not out loud, not enough for anyone to hear, but enough to feel it in my chest. Because of all the ways she could have denied it, she chose the one that named it without meaning to. Keeping score. That was what they called it when a man remembered the weight everyone else had decided was his job to carry. "I didn't keep score," I said. "I kept records." Elliot's eyes flicked to my jacket. There it was again. That small, unmistakable shift. He knew. He had always known I wrote things down. He just never believed it would matter. The first time I started writing things down, it wasn't about them. It was a legal pad by the kitchen phone, back when the phone still hung on the wall, and I used it for grocery totals, oil changes, appointment times, the small things that hold a house together without anyone noticing they exist. Then I retired, and suddenly I had time. Time to pick up the kids, time to wait for repairmen, time to drive Evelyn to places she could have driven herself if she didn't mind parking. Time to review Elliot's paperwork, explain Claire's bills, fix what broke, carry what was heavy, and say it was nothing. So I wrote it down. At first, it was just to remember. Monday, Claire's sink. Tuesday, Elliot's lender packet. Wednesday, Evelyn's pharmacy, dry cleaning. Thursday, vendor review. Friday, school pickup. Simple, clean, forgettable. Until it wasn't. Because after a while, the pattern became something I couldn't ignore anymore. Weeks where I had done something for everyone, and no one had sat with me for 10 minutes without asking for something in return. Months where money moved out of my accounts without ever coming back into conversation. Years where usefulness replaced presence so completely that gratitude would have felt out of place. That was the first ledger. The second one started when Northline showed up. That one had columns: vendor, amount, date, approval, relationship, notes. I wrote everything. Gray Harbor Media, Red Finch Advisory, Larchmont Procurement, Northline Strategy. Names that looked clean enough to pass, small enough to ignore, ordinary enough to bury inside real work. I followed addresses, saved filings, printed invoices, folded receipts into envelopes and marked them in blue ink because black faded too fast on cheap paper. And slowly, quietly, the lines started connecting. Vanessa's cousin wasn't the only familiar name. There was an old roommate, a former groomsman, a marketing consultant who shared a mailbox with a company Evelyn once described as handling wedding branding. Wedding branding. Even now, standing in that room, surrounded by flowers and gold-trimmed menus and carefully arranged place cards, I could still feel how wrong that phrase had been. Because this room wasn't separate from it. It was part of it. And Elliot knew I had seen enough to understand that. "Dad," he said, carefully now, his voice lower, controlled. "Whatever you think you have, You don't understand the context. Context. A word men use when facts won't help them. Mr. Callahan took a step closer then, not dramatic, not loud, but deliberate enough that people noticed. Enough that Elliot noticed most of all. "What context?" he asked. Elliot turned too fast. "It's nothing," he said. "Just family stuff." Family stuff. My split lip, the broken glass, the silence in a room full of witnesses, the notebook in my jacket. Family stuff. Mr. Callahan didn't move back. "Doesn't sound like family stuff," he said. Vanessa's composure slipped for half a second, just enough for the mask to crack, just enough to show the calculation underneath it. Evelyn reached for my arm again. This time, I stepped back. Not far, just enough. She stopped. I reached into my jacket. Elliot moved forward, one step, instinctively. "Dad." There was something new in his voice now. Not authority, not anger. Fear. I pulled the notebook out slowly. It looked smaller in my hand than it had felt all evening. Just a worn brown cover, bent at the edges, elastic stretched from use, nothing about it suggesting weight. But the room shifted toward it anyway. I opened it. Not the first page, not the last. Somewhere in the middle, where the paper had softened from being turned too many times. Elliot stared at it. He couldn't see the words. He didn't need to. He knew they were there. I ran my thumb down the page until it stopped. Then, for the first time, I didn't keep it to myself. "Northline strategy," I said, my voice steady. Not loud, but clear enough that the people closest to us leaned in without realizing they were doing it. $28,000. Sunday invoice, Monday payment. I lifted my eyes to Elliot. No deliverables. Silence. Not the polite kind, the heavy kind. Mr. Callahan's head tilted slightly, the way a man does when something small suddenly becomes very important. "Is that accurate?" he asked. He wasn't asking me. Elliot didn't answer right away, and that was the answer. I closed the notebook slowly, not in a hurry, not with anger, just enough to let the sound of it settle. And for the first time that night, the room stopped looking at me like I was the problem. They were looking at him, at all of them, at the space between what had been said and what could no longer be unsaid. I slipped the notebook back into my jacket. They had laughed at it for years, called it unnecessary, called it obsessive, called it nothing. I looked at my son, and this time, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I didn't keep this," I said quietly, "to remember what I did for you." I let the words sit there, long enough for him to feel them. "I kept it," I said, "for the day you'd pretend none of it happened." And standing there, in the middle of his wedding, with a room full of witnesses and nowhere left to step back to, that day had finally arrived. For a few seconds after I said it, no one moved. Not because they understood everything, they didn't. Most people in that room had never heard of Northline strategy before. They didn't know what a Sunday invoice meant, or why a Monday payment mattered, or why no deliverables could make a man like Mr. Callahan stop blinking. To them, those were just business words, dry and technical, the kind that belonged in quiet offices and email threads, not under soft lighting at a wedding reception beside flowers and champagne and a cake that still hadn't been cut. But they understood one thing. Elliot had not answered. And sometimes silence is louder than anything a man can say. He stood there with his mouth slightly open, then closed it, then looked at Vanessa like she might hand him a better version of himself. She didn't. For the first time all night, her face had lost that polished calm, that practiced stillness she wore like part of the dress. Her hand stayed on his arm, but now it looked less like support and more like control. Mr. Callahan took another step forward. Not large, not aggressive, just enough. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, and his tone shifted slightly, sharper now. "Did you say North Line Strategy?" The way he said the name told me he recognized it. I nodded. "Yes." Elliot moved too fast. "This is ridiculous," he said. "He doesn't know what he's talking about." The words came out thin, wrong, too practiced for a moment that required something real. "He seems to know the amount," Mr. Callahan replied. Elliot's jaw tightened. "It was one invoice," he said. "A small vendor issue. It has nothing to do with tonight." I glanced at the nearest table, at the glass centerpiece where one rose had slipped lower than the rest, its head leaning against the rim like it had given up before the night was over. "It has everything to do with tonight," I said. That was when Vanessa turned fully toward me. "This is my wedding," she said quietly, and there was no softness left in her voice now, only control. "I know." "Then don't do this." Not don't lie, not don't hurt him. Don't do this. As if the truth itself were the problem. Evelyn stepped in beside her, forming that familiar line. Mother and bride. Appearance over reality, something they had both practiced for years without ever naming it. "Harold," she said, steady and careful, "you're upset. You're not thinking clearly." A few months ago, that might have worked. The tone, the implication, the quiet suggestion that age and emotion made me unreliable. But something had shifted. The notebook had weight now, and so did the silence. "I'm upset," I said. "I'm not confused." A murmur spread through the room, not loud, but different. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about him. A man near the aisle leaned toward his wife. "Why isn't he answering?" he whispered, not quietly enough. Someone closer to the bar said, "Under threshold payments? That's not nothing." Another voice, sharper, cut through just enough to be heard. "That's how you hide it." Elliot heard that. I watched it land. Watched the moment his control slipped just a fraction further than he could pull back. Mr. Callahan didn't look away from him. "Do you have documentation?" he asked me. "Don't," Elliot snapped, stepping forward. "Don't entertain this." Mr. Callahan turned his head slightly. "I asked your father a question." Your father. Not problem. Not old man. Not embarrassment. Father. The word sat in the room, heavy in a way nothing else had been. "I do," I said. Claire's voice came out thin. "Dad, please." But she didn't finish, because even she knew it was too late for please. I reached into my jacket again. This time, no one tried to stop me. The notebook came out first, then the paper, folded once, then again. I opened it slowly, not for effect, just because old paper resists if you rush it, and the sound it made carried farther than it should have. "This is from a reconciliation file Elliot asked me to review," I said. "North Line wasn't one invoice." Elliot took a step toward me. Vanessa caught him, hard. "Elliot," she whispered. I kept my eyes on the page. Cleaner that way, safer than looking at him. "North Line Strategy appeared 4 times in 12 months, I said. 28,000, 31,000, 19,500, 27,000. A pause. Then I added, just enough louder. "All approved just under board notification threshold." Mr. Callahan's expression didn't change, but his attention sharpened.
"Who approved those payments?" he asked. "Our operations team," Elliot said quickly. "Name?" Silence. Half a second, too long. Vanessa stepped in again. "Marcus, this is not the place for this." He didn't look at her. "It became the place," he said, "when the groom hit the man keeping the records." That landed. Hard. A bridesmaid lowered her bouquet completely now, flowers brushing her dress. One of Elliot's groomsmen looked down like the floor might offer him a way out. A server swept the last of the broken glass into a pan, the sharp sound cutting through the quiet like something final. Evelyn had stopped speaking. She was watching me, and for the first time, she didn't look in control. She looked uncertain. I folded the paper again, carefully. Same lines, same creases. "My son asked me for help," I said, quieter now, and the room leaned in without meaning to. I gave it, every time. I fixed what he brought me. I warned him when things didn't look right. I looked at Elliot. He laughed. His jaw tightened. He called it my little old man ledger. A low reaction moved through the guests. Not loud, but real. And then, before anyone could soften it, I added, "He laughed right up until the moment he had to hit me to shut me up." That was the moment. You could feel it. The shift wasn't subtle anymore. It was visible. Phones lifted higher. People stopped pretending they weren't listening. Elliot didn't move, didn't speak, couldn't. I slid the paper back into my jacket.
The notebook stayed in my hand. Mr. Callahan took one more step closer. "How much more is there?" he asked. Elliot closed his eyes for just a second. Vanessa saw it. So did Evelyn. So did I. I looked down at the worn cover in my hand, at the pages they had dismissed for years, at the quiet record of everything they thought would disappear if no one said it out loud. Then I looked back at him. "Enough," I said. The word settled into the room like something permanent. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Elliot swallowed, and this time there was no hiding it, because the truth wasn't behind him anymore. It was standing in front of him, in his wedding, in front of everyone he had ever needed to impress. I slipped the notebook back into my jacket. They had laughed at it, ignored it, called it nothing. I looked at my son, and I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "This didn't stop being a wedding," I said quietly. I let the silence stretch just long enough. "You just stopped being the groom people thought you were." No one rushed in to fix it. That was the strange part, the part that didn't match the version of family I had spent years trying to believe in. The version where someone always steps forward to smooth things over, to laugh it off, to turn something sharp into something small enough to ignore. No one did that. The room didn't collapse into chaos, and it didn't recover either. It just stayed exactly where it was, stretched tight between what had happened and what no one wanted to name, like a thread pulled too far that hadn't snapped yet, but was thinking about it. I could hear things again. Not clearly at first, just fragments returning one by one. The low hum of the air conditioning above us. The faint clink of glass somewhere off to the side where someone had finally set their drink down a little too hard. The rustle of fabric as people shifted in their seats without committing to standing up. Life didn't come back all at once. It leaked back in. My tongue pressed once, without thinking, against the inside of my cheek, and the metallic taste was still there. Thinner now, but not gone. Sitting under everything like a reminder that this wasn't just something said, something argued, something that could be explained away later. My jaw felt tight on the left side. Not pain exactly, more like pressure. Like something swelling quietly under the skin where his hand had landed. Elliot was still in front of me, but something in him had already started to step away from what he'd done.
Not physically, not yet, but internally, like he was trying to reframe it in real time, to move it from action to reaction, from choice to necessity. "You keep doing that," he said, quieter now, but not calmer, the words coming out uneven, like he hadn't decided what they meant before he said them. "You say one thing and then act like it's nothing, like we're all just supposed to take it." I watched his face as he spoke, the small movements that most people miss, the way his jaw tightened a fraction too late, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the left side of the room where Lena's family was seated, checking, measuring, adjusting. He wasn't talking to me, not really. He was talking to the room, trying to rebuild it, trying to get it back on his side. "I wasn't talking to them," I said, and my voice didn't rise, didn't push. It just moved through the space like it belonged there. "I was talking to you." That landed, not loud, but direct. And for a second, just a second, he didn't have anywhere to put it. Behind him, Lena shifted again, her fingers tightening slightly around his sleeve before letting go, not wanting to be seen holding onto him too long, not wanting to look like she needed to. "Can we not do this right now?" she said, finally stepping half a pace forward, placing herself just enough between us to be noticed, but not enough to block the view. "This is not the time." Not, "Don't do this," not, "What are you doing?" Just, "Not now." I had heard it for years, in smaller rooms, at dinner tables, in kitchens where the light was softer and the stakes felt lower. But the pattern didn't change just because the room got bigger. "This seems like exactly the time," I said. And I didn't look at her when I said it. I kept my eyes on Elliot. Because this wasn't hers to manage, no matter how much she wanted it to be. A laugh came from somewhere to the right, short, uncomfortable. Then a whisper followed it, just loud enough to carry. "He hit him." Not shocked, not defending, just stating it out loud. That was the second crack. Not in me, in them, in the room. People were starting to choose, not loudly, not openly, but in the small ways that matter more, in where they looked, in who they faced, in which version of events they allowed themselves to believe without questioning. Callahan hadn't moved. He was still standing where he had been, one hand resting lightly against the back of a chair that didn't belong to him. His posture relaxed in a way that wasn't casual, just controlled. Like he understood something about this moment that most of the people here didn't yet. When our eyes met, he didn't nod, didn't smile, didn't give me anything I could point to later and say, "That's when it shifted." But he didn't look away either. That was enough. Elliot exhaled sharply, dragging a hand back through his hair, the movement rougher than it needed to be, like he was trying to shake something loose. "You don't get to sit there and rewrite this," he said, and the words came faster now, stacking on top of each other. "You've been doing this my whole life, saying things, pushing people, acting like you're the only one who sees what's really going on. And then when someone finally calls you out, you act surprised." There it was again, the version. Built quickly, clean edges, no room for interruption. I let him finish, let him build it all the way out, because that was the mistake. When people build something fast enough, they forget to check if it stands. "My whole life," I repeated, not mocking, not challenging, just placing the phrase back in front of him like something worth examining. He nodded immediately, too quickly. "Yes." I leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, just enough to close the distance by an inch, enough to make the conversation feel like it belonged to us again and not the room. "Then say it," I said. The words were quiet, but they didn't give him anywhere to go. Say one thing I said tonight that wasn't true. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He swallowed, looked past me again. That same reflex, that same need to find something outside of himself to anchor to. He started, and then stopped, his voice catching on something that wasn't there a second ago. You always do this. Not a sentence, not an answer. A stall, a slip. Lena stepped in again, faster this time. We're not doing this, she said. And now there was edge in it, not just control, but urgency. Like she could feel the direction this was moving in, and didn't like it. This is supposed to be a celebration, and you're turning it into what? I asked. And I looked at her now, just for a second. Just long enough for her to realize she had been pulled into it whether she wanted to be or not. She hesitated. That was all it took. Because she didn't have a word for it that didn't expose something. Conflict meant there was something to conflict about. Seen meant there was something worth seeing. Problem meant there was something wrong.
So she didn't finish. Behind her, one of the older women at the nearest table adjusted the napkin in her lap 3 times in a row without looking down, her eyes fixed somewhere over Lena's shoulder. Like if she kept them there long enough, she wouldn't have to choose. Another guest leaned toward his wife and murmured something under his breath. She didn't answer. She just shook her head. Not at me. At him. Elliot heard all of it. I saw it register. And that was when something changed. Not outwardly, not in a way anyone could point to, but inside him. The ground he thought he was standing on wasn't as solid as he needed it to be. You should leave, he said suddenly, the words coming out flat, stripped of the performance they had before. Just go. We'll talk about this later. Later, of course. Later was always safer. Later was where things got softened, reshaped, edited until they fit a version everyone could live with. I looked at him for a long second. Long enough for it to feel intentional. Long enough for the room to feel it too. I drove you to your first job, I said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't match anything that had been said so far, which is why it landed. You were late, I continued, and I could see it, clear as if it were happening in front of me again. The way he had rushed out the front door with his tie half done. The way he had forgotten his lunch on the counter and run back in for it, breathless, nervous, trying to pretend he wasn't. You forgot your lunch, I said. A beat. I waited in the parking lot until you went inside. Another beat. Because you didn't want me to walk you in. His eyes flickered, just once. I didn't. Simple. Unavoidable. Memory doesn't argue. It doesn't negotiate. It just sits there. And the version he had built, the one where I was always pushing, always overstepping, didn't fit cleanly over that moment.
You don't get to...
He started again, but it broke halfway through, thinner this time, like the words didn't have enough weight to carry themselves. I'm not staying, I said, and I sat back, reaching for the glass of water in front of me. My fingers steady now, the earlier tremor gone, replaced by something quieter, more controlled. But I'm not leaving because you told me to. That shifted the air again. Subtle, but real. Lena's hand tightened at her side. Callahan straightened just slightly. Someone near the back finally took a sip of their drink, like they had been holding it for minutes and hadn't realized. I'm leaving, I said, because this isn't where the truth is going to get said tonight. No one stopped me. No one tried. And as I stood, slow, deliberate,
feeling the chair slide back against the floor with a soft, steady sound that didn't rush or scrape or apologize for the space it took up. I lifted my hand once more to my cheek, pressing lightly, feeling the dull, rising swell under the skin, the echo of something that wasn't just physical, something that had been building a long time before tonight. They thought this moment was the end of something, a boundary, a correction, a way to put me back where I belonged. But they were wrong. This wasn't the end. It was the moment the room realized. This story wasn't going to stay inside that ballroom. I didn't hurry when I left the ballroom. That mattered. If I had rushed, they could have called it panic. If I had stormed out, they could have called it anger. If I had shouted, cried, pointed, begged, or demanded, they would have found a way to make the whole room remember my reaction more than Elliot's hand on my face. So I walked, slowly. Not proudly, exactly, just steadily.
The kind of steady you learn when your knees hurt, your cheek burns, your jaw doesn't quite close the way it should, and there's still that thin metallic taste sitting in the back of your mouth like something unfinished. The aisle between the tables seemed longer than it had before, maybe because everyone was looking now, maybe because no one knew where to put their eyes. A woman near the back lowered her phone when I passed, not fast enough to pretend she hadn't been recording. A man I didn't know shifted his chair inward, giving me more room than I needed, as if space was the only apology he knew how to offer. Nobody said my name, nobody stopped me, but I could feel the room following, not with footsteps, with attention. And if you've ever walked out of a room like that, not running, not yelling, just leaving, with something still sitting in your chest that hasn't found a place to go yet, then you know it's not the silence that hurts. It's the moment you realize no one is coming after you. The hallway outside the reception room was quieter, but not silent. Music still leaked through the doors behind me, muffled now, softened into something almost cruel, like the building hadn't realized the wedding had already changed into something else. The carpet under my shoes swallowed each step. Somewhere down the hall, a hand dryer kicked on for a second, then cut off abruptly, leaving behind that sterile, over-clean smell that clung to places like this. I stopped in front of a mirror near the restroom. For a second, I almost didn't recognize myself. Not because of the bruise beginning to rise along my cheek, though it was there now, deeper at the edge, spreading slow under the skin. Not because of the small split at my lip or the collar of my shirt sitting crooked under my tie. It was the look in my own eyes. I didn't look shocked anymore. I looked awake. That was worse. Shock fades. Awake stays. I turned on the faucet and let the water run cold. The sink was too clean. The kind of clean that belongs in expensive venues, where people pay other people to make sure no one ever sees what gets wiped away. I cupped water in my hand and rinsed my mouth once, then again, spitting quietly, watching a thin pink thread spiral down and disappear. It looked like nothing. A little blood, a little water, gone in seconds. But the taste didn't go away. It stayed, light, persistent, sitting just behind my teeth every time I swallowed. For years, I had let things disappear like that. Small insults, missing thanks, unpaid loans, broken promises. The way Evelyn corrected my stories at dinner. The way Elliot only said "Dad" when he needed something. The way Claire could call me before sunrise about a leaking sink and still look embarrassed by me before sunset. One by one, none of it looked large enough to name. Together, it had become my life.
I reached for a paper towel and pressed it lightly to the corner of my mouth. When I pulled it away, there was a faint smear, not dramatic, just enough to notice if you were already looking for it. I folded the towel once, then again, and set it on the edge of the sink like I wasn't sure yet whether I needed it or not. I dried my hands slowly with another towel. My fingers were stiff. The knuckle on my right hand ached from gripping the notebook too long. And for a strange moment, I noticed a tiny tear near the seam of my jacket pocket, probably from years of slipping that same notebook in and out. That small tear almost undid me. Not the punch, not the room, the pocket. Because it reminded me how long I had carried everything quietly, close to my body, hidden inside something old and respectable enough that nobody looked twice. I reached into that pocket and pulled the notebook out. Brown cover, bent corners, elastic stretched too loose now. A small coffee stain near the bottom from a morning months earlier when Evelyn had asked why I was writing things down.
I had told her it was for memory. That had been true. Just not all of it. I opened to the page from earlier and read the line again. Elliot struck me at his wedding. Witnesses present. Cameras recording. Reason given. Food. Food. That word still looked wrong. Too small, too ordinary. I flipped back a few pages. Northline Strategy. Gray Harbor Media, Red Finch Advisory, Larchmont Procurement, Claire's Sink, Evelyn Pharmacy, Elliott Lender Packet, Property Tax, Emergency Transfer, School Pickup, Callahan Meeting, Missing Approval, No Deliverables, Business and Family, Money and Favors, Love and Labor. All blurred together because that was how they had always kept it confusing. If something was family, I wasn't supposed to count it. If something was business, I wasn't supposed to feel it. If something hurt, I was supposed to understand. I was always supposed to understand. I closed the notebook. My jaw tightened again when I did, a dull pressure building where the swelling had started to settle in. Not sharp, just present. Like something reminding me it wasn't finished with me yet. Behind me, the restroom door opened. I didn't turn right away. For a second, I braced. Elliot, Evelyn, Claire, someone coming in to soften it, rewrite it, ask me to help them fix it. It wasn't them. It was Mr. Callahan. He stepped in slowly, pausing near the door, giving the room a second to belong to me before he entered it fully. Mr. Whitaker. I folded the notebook once in my hand. Mr. Callahan. His eyes moved to my face, not lingering, but not pretending not to see either. Do you need medical attention? I almost said no. Reflex, old habit. No, I'm fine. No, it's nothing. Instead, I swallowed once, the metallic taste still there. I don't know, I said. He nodded. I can have someone call security, he said. Then medical. Security. That word didn't exist in my family. To them, this was embarrassment. To him, it was procedure. I don't want a bigger scene, I said. With respect, he replied. The scene already happened. That settled somewhere deep. Not comfort, not sympathy. Just truth. From the hallway, voices carried in, sharper now. Evelyn, controlled, urgent. He needs to come back in, she was saying. We can still fix this. Then Elliot, rough, lower. He pushed me, he said. You didn't hear what he said. A pause, then louder. I'm not apologizing for that. I didn't react, not outwardly. But something in me closed the distance between what I had suspected and what I now knew. Mr. Callahan glanced toward the door, then back at me. What you said in there, he said quietly. About Northline. Is there more? Yes, I said. How much?
I thought of the pages, the folders at home, the backups, the dates. Enough that he should have answered you. His expression didn't change. Then don't give it to me here, he said. Give it to counsel, properly. Properly. That word landed clean. Properly meant records, copies, timelines, proof that didn't depend on how anyone felt about me. Properly meant they would have to answer the paper, not the old man. I nodded. I can do that. I think you already have. He moved toward the door, then paused. You don't have to go back in there, he said. I looked at the mirror one more time, at the bruise, at the collar I hadn't fixed, at the man who didn't look shocked anymore. No, I said. I don't. But I knew I would. Not to stay, not to argue, not to be understood. I would go back because leaving now would let them decide what this moment meant. And I was done letting them write the ending while I stood in the hallway. I slipped the notebook back into my jacket, careful of the torn seam, and let the collar stay crooked. When the door opened, the sound came back sharper. Voices, movement. Something trying to continue. Something already broken.
Elliot again. He's always been like this. I stepped forward into the light, because they were still using the wrong word. Contain. That was what they thought this was. A mess. A scene. A father who needed to be managed. They still didn't understand. I wasn't the thing they needed to contain. I was the thing they should have been afraid of all along. The man who had finally started keeping score. When I pushed the door open, the room didn't go quiet all at once. That would have been too clean, too simple. Instead, the sound broke unevenly, like something tearing slowly instead of snapping. Conversations thinned out in pockets, a few people still talking because they hadn't noticed yet, others already turning their heads, their eyes moving before their bodies did, the way people do when they sense something unfinished walking back into a space that thought it had already moved on. The music was still playing, soft, wrong, a violin track that had no idea what had just happened. I stepped inside without rushing, feeling the shift move through the room ahead of me, table by table, like a ripple that didn't need volume to spread. A waiter froze halfway between two guests, tray tilted just slightly, as if the balance of things had changed without warning. Someone near the center laughed too loudly at something, then stopped mid-breath when they realized no one else was laughing with them anymore. I saw Elliot before he saw me. He was standing near the head table, jacket off now, sleeves pushed halfway up his forearms, his posture tight, like he was holding himself together by force. Evelyn stood close to him, angled just enough to look like support instead of control. Claire lingered near the side of the room, her smile thin, her eyes moving between me and the guests, like she was trying to decide which version of the story would cost her less. Then Elliot looked up, and I watched his face change when he realized I hadn't left. Not really. He set his glass down too hard. It didn't shatter. It just made a sound loud enough to pull the rest of the room toward us. "Dad," he said. A warning dressed up as a name. I kept walking. Not toward him first, but toward table 18, where my plate still sat, the fork resting crooked near the edge, the sauce drying in a small brown streak where the meal had gone cold. Food. Still there. Still ordinary. Still the excuse they were trying to use for something much larger. I picked up the napkin and folded it once, then again. My fingers were slower than usual. My cheek still throbbed under the skin, and each movement of my jaw reminded me that my son's hand had landed exactly where everyone could see it. "You shouldn't have come back in," Elliot said. The room heard that. Good. I turned toward him. I wasn't finished. Evelyn stepped forward before he could answer, her voice soft enough to sound caring and firm enough to be control. "Harold," she said, Let's not do this here. I looked at her. You already did it here. Her smile tightened. We've all had a long day. Emotions run high at weddings. I think what Elliot is trying to say. I think Elliot has said enough. That landed cleaner than I expected. Elliot laughed once, short and ugly. You embarrassed yourself, he said. And now you come back in here like what? Like you're going to make a speech? I'm not making a speech. Good, he said, too quickly. Because no one wants to hear it. That was the mistake. Not the biggest one, not yet, but a mistake. Because the room had already started listening. I reached into my jacket and took out the notebook again. The movement was small. The air changed anyway. What is that? Elliot asked. You said I embarrassed myself, I replied. I want to make sure I'm remembering things correctly. I don't need your notes. They're not for you. For the first time since I stepped back inside, uncertainty flickered across his face. Because he understood then. He wasn't the audience anymore. I opened the notebook. You struck me, I said, not raising my voice. At your wedding, in front of your guests. And when asked why, you said it was because of food. That's not what happened, Elliot said immediately. Then tell them what did. Silence moved in. Not empty. Waiting. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice low and urgent. Harold, you're making this worse. For who? She didn't answer, because the answer depended on who she believed mattered. Elliot's jaw tightened. He's been pushing me all day, he said, turning slightly so the room could hear. Making comments, acting like this is his event, like he gets to sit there and eat like he owns the place after everything. After everything? I repeated. He hesitated, just long enough. You want to talk about everything? He said, louder now, trying to fill the space before it settled. You want to tell them how you've been acting the last few years? Showing up when it suits you? Keeping score like we owe you something? Keeping score. There it was again, out loud, for everyone. I looked down at the notebook in my hand, at the pages they had always mocked, because they had never been the ones who needed proof. I don't think you owe me anything, I said. That threw him. Then what is this? I'm remembering. The room stayed still. No music now. Someone had finally turned it off. You call it keeping score, I continued. But I started writing things down because I couldn't keep it straight anymore. Not the errands, not the money, not the business papers, not the things I signed because you told me it was easier that way. Elliot's face changed. There it was, the first real crack. I turned one page, then another. I remember the night you came to my house with the blue folder, I said. You were wearing that gray coat Evelyn bought you for Christmas. You stood in my kitchen and told me the bank needed an older guarantor because it would make the loan terms cleaner. His lips parted. Dad, you said it was temporary. Evelyn's hand tightened at his elbow. I kept going. You said Meridian Bridge just needed stability on paper. You said I wouldn't be exposed. You said, just sign here, Dad. It's easier. The room shifted. Not loudly, but enough. Because people understand signatures. They understand fathers trusting sons. They understand the difference between helping and being used. Elliot shook his head. That's not. I signed because you were my son. My voice did not break. That almost made it worse. I signed because you looked tired. Because you said payroll was coming due. Because you said if the bank delayed another week, people might lose their jobs. I signed because I remembered driving you to your first job and waiting in the parking lot because you didn't want me walking you in. I looked at him. You knew exactly which memories to stand on. That hit harder than the numbers. I could feel it. A woman near the front lowered her hand from her mouth. One of the groomsmen looked at Elliot, really looked at him, like he was seeing a man instead of a friend for the first time that night. Mr. Callahan didn't move, but his eyes sharpened. Elliot tried to recover. "You wanted to help," he said. Too fast, too sharp, too revealing. "You wanted to be involved. Don't stand there now and act like I forced you." There it was, the sentence he shouldn't have said. The room felt it before he did. I nodded once, slowly. "No," I said. "You didn't force me." His shoulders lowered a fraction, as if he thought he had found ground. Then I turned the notebook toward myself and read the line I had written 2 years earlier. March 14th. Elliot asked me to sign revised guarantee. Said documents were unchanged. I looked up. They weren't. The color drained from his face. Not all at once. Enough. "Red Finch Advisory," I said. "Northline Strategy, Gray Harbor Media, Larchmont Procurement. All vendor payments moved after that revision, all tied to accounts I was never told about." Evelyn whispered my name. Not an instruction this time. A warning. "Harold?" I didn't look at her. "You told me it was paperwork," I said to Elliot. "You made it liability." A guest near the aisle said, too loudly to hide it, "Oh my God!" That was the line. The room crossed it with her, because now it wasn't vague anymore. Not business drama, not family tension. A father had been asked to sign. A son had changed the risk. And now everyone understood why the notebook mattered. Elliot stepped forward. "Stop talking. Not please, not Dad. Stop talking." Mr. Callahan moved then, just one step, but it was enough. "I'd advise you not to say another word like that," he said. The room went colder. Elliot froze. Vanessa's hand left his sleeve, slowly. That small movement did more damage than any accusation could have. I closed the notebook, not because I was done, because I had said enough for one room to understand the shape of the rest. "You said no one wanted to hear it," I told him. I looked around the ballroom, at the raised phones, the still faces, the people who had stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. Then I looked back at my son. But that was never true. I slipped the notebook back inside my jacket. The pocket seam pulled slightly against the worn cover. This time, I didn't hide the effort. You just needed me to believe it. And for the first time all night, Elliot looked around the room and realized no one was looking away. No one clapped. No one raised their voice. That was the part that made it worse. Because the room had stopped behaving like a wedding and started behaving like something else entirely, something quieter, more watchful. The kind of space where people didn't rush to react because they understood instinctively that whatever came next mattered more than whatever had already been said. Elliot didn't move. Not toward his phone, not toward the table, not toward anyone. He just stood there, caught in that narrow space between being asked a direct question and not having an answer that could survive being heard out loud. "Show them," I repeated. Not louder, just steady, because the weight of it didn't need volume anymore. Evelyn stepped forward again, but there was a difference now. A hesitation that hadn't been there earlier, like she was calculating the risk of every word before she said it, and finding fewer options than she expected. "This is not happening," she said, her voice tight, controlled, but thinner now, stretched over something that was beginning to slip. "We are not pulling up financial records in the middle of a reception. This is completely inappropriate."
Claire nodded quickly, stepping in beside her, her tone softer but just as urgent.
Exactly. This is spiraling. We can handle this privately. There's no reason to turn it into...
There is a reason, I said. That stopped them. Not completely, just enough. Because it didn't happen privately, I continued, feeling the words settle into the room in a way they hadn't earlier. Because now there was context behind them. Now there was something people could attach meaning to. You didn't ask me to sign those papers in an office with a lawyer present. You didn't explain the changes in a meeting. You stood in my kitchen. You leaned on the counter where your mother used to leave grocery lists. You told me it was easier this way. Elliot flinched, small but visible. You don't get to rewrite that part, I said. A guest near the center table shifted in their seat, the legs of the chair scraping lightly against the floor, a sound that felt too loud in the quiet that had settled over everything. Elliot, someone said from behind him, one of the groomsmen, his voice uncertain but firm enough to break through. Just show it. If it's what you're saying, then just show it. That was the first fracture from his side. Not from me, not from the room as a whole, from someone who was supposed to be standing with him. Elliot turned sharply. You don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. But it came out defensive, not authoritative. And the difference was clear. No, the groomsman said, quieter now, but not backing down. I don't. That's the point. The room felt that. Because it wasn't accusation, it was expectation. And expectation is harder to fight. Elliot exhaled hard through his nose, his hand moving to his pocket, stopping, then moving again like he couldn't decide whether reaching for his phone would help him or trap him further. Evelyn stepped closer to him, her voice low enough that she probably thought only he could hear it. Don't, she said. He looked at her, and for the first time all night, there was something close to resentment in that look. Don't what? He said, not nearly as quiet as she had been. Don't give them more, she replied, sharper now, the control slipping again. Give them more. Not prove them wrong, not clarify. Give them more. That phrasing landed harder than she intended. Claire heard it too. I saw it in the way her posture shifted, the way her shoulders pulled back slightly, creating just a little more distance between herself and both of them. Not enough for anyone to call it out, but enough for anyone paying attention to notice. Elliot noticed. Of course he did. And that was when something in him tipped. Not outward, inward. The kind of shift that doesn't make noise, but changes direction.
You think I'm just going to stand here and let him do this? Elliot said, louder now, looking between them, then back at the room. You think I'm just going to let him drag everything out like I'm the only one responsible for how things ended up? No one answered. Because again, the room wasn't arguing. It was waiting. That made him angrier. I built those companies, he continued, his voice rising, not controlled anymore, not measured, just pushing forward. I took the risks. I handled the clients. I kept everything running when things got tight. And now he wants to stand here and act like he had no idea what he was signing? I had an idea, I said. That cut through it. He turned back to me. Then stop pretending you didn't, he shot back. I had an idea of what you told me, I replied, not what you changed after. Silence again. Not empty. Focused. You said Meridian Bridge needed stability, I continued. Not rushing, not pushing, just laying it out piece by piece.
the way I had written it down when I didn't yet know I would need to say it out loud one day. You said my name would help secure the initial terms. You did not say that you would restructure the vendor flow 6 weeks later and route payments through accounts I had never seen. Elliot's jaw tightened. You signed the revision, he said. Yes, I said. After you told me nothing had changed. That hung there, heavy, real. A woman near the back shook her head slowly, not at me, not at Elliot, just at the situation itself. The kind of reaction that comes when something crosses from complicated into clear. Evelyn stepped in again, more forcefully this time. This is exactly why you don't do this in public, she said. Details get twisted, people misunderstand, and suddenly something that could have been resolved turns into... Into what? I asked. She didn't answer, because she couldn't define it without defining the problem. Elliot finally pulled his phone out.
The movement was sharp, almost aggressive, like he was trying to prove something, not just to the room, but to himself.
Fine, he said. You want to see documents? You want to do this here? He unlocked the screen, his thumb moving too fast at first, then slowing as he navigated, his breathing just slightly off. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough for me to see because I had watched him breathe like that before, when he was younger, when he was trying to stay calm and failing. He pulled up a file, turned the screen. For a second, it looked like he might actually hand it over. Then he stopped. His hand hovered, and in that hesitation, everything was visible. Not the document, the doubt. Elliot, Claire said softly, not stepping forward this time, not touching him, just saying his name like it was a line she was testing before deciding whether to cross it. He didn't look at her. He was looking at me. And I realized then that this wasn't about the room anymore. Not for him. It was about me seeing it, me confirming it, me being right. If you show them, I said, just as quietly, make sure it's the original. That was it. That was the shift. Because now it wasn't just about showing something. It was about which version. Elliot's hand lowered slightly, not fully, just enough. And the room understood. They didn't need to read a single line. They didn't need to understand corporate structures or financial layering or liability transfers. They understood hesitation. They understood when someone had something to show and didn't show it. That was enough. A murmur moved through the guests again, softer this time, more certain, less confused. People no longer asking each other what was happening, but reacting to what they already believed they had seen. Evelyn stepped back, not forward, back. It was small, but it was the first time she had done that all night. Claire didn't move at all. She just watched.
Elliot let out a breath, long and uneven, then locked his phone and slipped it back into his pocket without showing anything. And that was louder than if he had. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't need to. The room had already filled in the space. If you've ever been the one who trusted first, I said slowly, not looking at anyone in particular, and somehow looking at everyone at the same time. The one who signed because you believed the person in front of you wouldn't put you in a position you couldn't see yet. Then you already understand why I wrote things down. A few heads nodded, not many, enough. And if you're still here, I continued, the words settling naturally into the moment instead of interrupting it. Stay with me a little longer, because what comes next isn't about what he says. I let that sit, just long enough. It's about what he can't show.
Elliot's eyes flicked up, sharp. For a second, something like panic moved across his face before he forced it back down. But it had already been seen, and once something is seen, it doesn't go back. Claire stepping away did not look dramatic. That was why it hurt him more. She didn't cry, she didn't point, she didn't announce anything to the room. She simply moved one step back from Elliot, then another, enough to put air between herself and the man she had been trying to protect all night. A small movement, almost nothing. But in a room where everyone had learned to watch the smallest things, it landed like a verdict. Elliot saw it immediately. His face changed before he could stop it. Not fully, not in a way he would have admitted to later, but enough. His eyes moved to Claire, then to the space she had created, then back to me, as if somehow I had made her move, as if every person in the room choosing to believe what they were seeing was another thing he could blame on me. "Claire," he said. Her name came out softer than anything he had said all night.
That almost made it worse. Because now, after everything, after the hit, after the numbers, after the papers he would not show, he still knew how to soften his voice when he needed someone. Claire didn't answer right away. She looked at him with one hand pressed against her stomach, the other holding her phone so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. I remembered that hand small once, wrapped around two of my fingers in a grocery store parking lot after she got scared by a truck backing up too loudly. I remembered carrying her into the house with a fever, her cheek hot against my collar. I remembered fixing the kitchen sink that morning while she barely looked at me. Memory is cruel that way. It does not let people become only one thing. "I don't know what you want me to say," she whispered. Elliot stared at her. "Say you know me." The room stayed still. Claire swallowed. "I thought I did." That was the first real break. Not mine, not Elliot's. The family's. Evelyn turned on Claire so quickly the pearls at her throat shifted against her skin. "Do not do this," she said, low and sharp. Claire flinched, not much, but I saw it. So did Elliot. So did the room. For the first time, people were not just watching my son. They were watching my wife. Watching the way she moved, the way her voice changed when someone in the family stopped playing their assigned part. Vanessa had been quiet for too long. That was how I knew she was preparing something. Women like Vanessa do not go silent because they are empty. They go silent because they are choosing which version of themselves will survive the room. Her dress still looked perfect somehow. The lace sleeves, the clean lines, the careful fall of fabric, all untouched by what had happened around it. But her face had changed. The glow was gone. What remained was calculation under makeup. She looked at Elliot, then at Mr. Callahan, then at the phones. Not at me. Not yet. "Elliot," she said, and every person nearby heard the shift in her voice. It was no longer a bride speaking to her groom. It was a woman separating her future from a sinking thing. "Is any of what he said false?" Elliot's head turned slowly toward her. "What?" "Is it false?" she repeated. He blinked at her, like betrayal had arrived from a direction he had not expected. "You're asking me that?" "Yes." One word. Clean. Cold. The room felt it. For a second, Elliot looked almost young again. Not innocent, not wounded, just stunned by the discovery that loyalty has a limit when it is being filmed. "You know what this is," he said, quieter now. "You know he's twisting it." Vanessa didn't move. "Then say which part." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out.
That silence did more damage than accusation. Because he had been asked the same question too many ways now, by me, by Callahan, by the room, by the woman he was supposed to marry, and each time the answer got smaller. Evelyn stepped in fast. "Vanessa, this is not helpful." Vanessa turned to her. Neither woman smiled. For years, I had watched Evelyn win rooms by making other people feel impolite for noticing the truth. She could lower her voice and make cruelty sound like responsibility. She could tighten her mouth and make a person feel childish for asking a fair question. But Vanessa was not Claire. Vanessa had not grown up inside Evelyn's weather. She did not mistake control for authority. "No," Vanessa said. "What's not helpful is finding out at my reception that there may be financial exposure tied to my name, my family, and my marriage." My marriage, not our marriage. Elliot heard that too. His jaw tightened. "There is no exposure to you." "Show me." Again, that word, show. The one word he could not survive. He looked at her, then at the room, then down at the floor near the broken glass that had been swept away but not forgotten. The floor still had a faint wet mark where my water had spilled, a dull shine under the lights. Someone had missed a small shard near the table leg. It caught the chandelier light every time someone shifted. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have. That little piece of glass had more honesty in it than my family had shown me all night. Mr. Callahan moved closer. Not to me this time, to Vanessa. "Ms. Cole," he said, his tone careful, professional now. "I recommend you do not sign anything tonight. If there are already executed marriage-related financial documents, prenuptial schedules, joint asset disclosures, or business guarantees connected to Meridian Bridge, have them reviewed independently." The words were dry, legal, precise, and devastating. Because suddenly the wedding was no longer only emotionally broken, it was administratively dangerous. Vanessa's face went still. "What guarantees?" she asked. Elliot's eyes flashed. "Marcus," he said, "back off." Callahan looked at him. "Don't call me Marcus right now." The room went cold. That single sentence changed the hierarchy. Until then, Elliot had been the groom, the center, the man everyone had dressed up to celebrate. Now he was someone being warned by an investor in front of witnesses. Vanessa stepped back, not as far as Claire, but enough. Enough that Elliot saw it, enough that Evelyn saw it, enough that the phones caught it. "Vanessa," Elliot said, and now there was panic under his voice, real panic, no longer polished by anger. "Don't let him do this. Don't let them turn this into something it isn't." Her eyes stayed on him. "I asked you if it was false." He took one step toward her. She took one step back. That was the second break. The bride moved away from the groom. No one gasped. They didn't need to. The room understood. Evelyn's control finally cracked. "This is absurd," she said, louder now, losing the softness completely. "All of you standing here, feeding into the bitterness of a man who has spent years resenting his own children for needing him. Harold has always done this. He gives, then he punishes people for accepting. He helps, then he turns it into debt. He makes himself useful, then acts wounded when people rely on him." There it was, the family doctrine, said out loud at last. For a moment, no one spoke. Not because they believed her, because the cruelty had finally been named in its own language. I looked at Evelyn, at the woman I had shared a home with for nearly 4 decades, the woman who knew which shelf I kept the spare batteries on, which mug I used for coffee, which knee hurt when it rained, which shirt collar never sat right because I refused to throw the shirt away. She knew everything small about me and had understood almost nothing. I didn't punish anyone for needing me, I said. My voice was quiet. Too quiet for the room, maybe, but they listened anyway. I punished myself for thinking need was the same as love. Evelyn's face tightened. That one reached her. Not enough to soften her, enough to make her angry. "You are not a victim," she said. I touched my cheek lightly, just once. The swelling had deepened. The skin felt tight under my fingers. "No," I said. "Tonight, I'm evidence." That moved through the room like a blade. A phone near the back lifted higher. Someone whispered, "Jesus." A bridesmaid covered her mouth. Claire looked down, and this time I could not tell if it was shame or fear. Elliot turned away from Vanessa and back to me. "You wanted this," he said, his voice rough now, breaking at the edges. "You wanted to stand here and watch everything fall apart." I looked at him, and for the first time that night, I almost told him the kinder lie, that I didn't, that none of this gave me any satisfaction, that I wished things were different.
But I was too tired to keep giving him versions of me that made him more comfortable. "I wanted you to stop lying," I said. He laughed once. It sounded damaged. "You could have done this privately." I looked around the room, at the guests, at the phones, at the broken wedding schedule, at the cake still untouched near the back wall, at Vanessa standing apart from him now, at Claire no longer at his side, at Evelyn breathing hard, pearls still in place, composure gone. "Privately is where you kept getting away with it," I said. That was the third break, not because I said it loudly, because no one disagreed. Elliot's face twisted, and for a second I thought he might step toward me again. The room felt it too. A few people shifted. Mr. Callahan moved without making it obvious, placing himself at an angle that was not quite between us, but close enough. Elliot saw him. Stopped. That stop mattered, because earlier no one had stood between us. Now someone might. Vanessa slowly reached to her left hand. For a moment, I didn't understand what she was doing. Then I did. She touched the ring, not pulling it off, not yet, just touching it. Elliot stared. "Don't," he said. Vanessa looked at him, and then, in front of everyone, she lowered her hand from the ring and said, "I need the documents." Not "I love you," not "we can fix this." The documents. That was the final break. Because a wedding can survive tears. It can survive arguments. It can even survive scandal if enough people agree to lie afterward. But it cannot survive the bride asking for paperwork before the first dance. Elliot looked around the room again, and this time there was nowhere for his eyes to rest. Not on Vanessa, not on Claire, not on Evelyn, not on Callahan, not on me. The room had not turned loud. It had turned final. I slipped the notebook deeper into my jacket, careful of the torn seam, and felt the worn cover settle against my side. For years they had called it keeping score. Tonight, they finally understood what it was. Not revenge, not bitterness, not an old man's habit. A record. And once a record enters the room, the story stops belonging to the people who lied first. Vanessa asking for the documents was the moment the wedding ended. Not officially. No one announced it. No one stepped up to the microphone and told the room to go home. The cake still stood untouched under its soft light. The band lingered near their instruments, pretending to adjust cables, and the waitstaff kept moving, as if routine could stitch the night back together. But something had already broken in a way that doesn't mend. A wedding can survive a late toast, a ruined centerpiece, even a quiet argument tucked behind a closed door. It cannot survive paperwork. Not that kind. Not when the bride asks for documents before the first dance. Elliot looked at Vanessa like she had just undone him in front of 400 witnesses. And maybe she had. There are men who can survive anger, who can out-talk accusations, who can charm a room back into their favor. But they don't survive doubt. "Vanessa," he said, softer now, like volume alone might bring her back. "You know me." She held his gaze for a long second. "I thought I did." The same words Claire had used, different voice, same fracture. Evelyn turned sharply, searching for someone, anyone, willing to step in and translate this moment back into something survivable. For years, she had only needed to hesitate, and people would rush in to protect her version of the truth. Tonight, no one moved. Mr. Callahan stepped forward just enough to make it clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. "I'll have my counsel contact yours," he said. Counsel. A word that doesn't raise its voice, but ends conversations. Elliot's jaw tightened. "This is insane." "No," Callahan said calmly. "This is overdue." That was when the room started to let go of the night. Chairs shifted. A glass was set down too carefully. Someone near the back picked up her purse and whispered to her husband, like they were leaving a wake, not a wedding. A groomsman removed his boutonniere and placed it beside a plate he hadn't touched. Small movements, but final ones. Vanessa didn't make a scene. She didn't throw the ring, didn't cry, didn't give Elliot the kind of chaos he knew how to fight. She did something worse. She stepped away from him, walked across the room, sat down at her mother's table, and folded her hands in her lap like a woman waiting for a lawyer, not a husband. Elliot watched her go. Then he turned to me. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be, flickering under the man he had built himself into. Not enough to forgive him, not enough to change anything. Just enough to remember that this hadn't started here. "You did this," he said. My cheek still ached, my jaw had stiffened, and I could still taste a trace of iron at the back of my throat. I met his eyes. "No," I said quietly. "I stopped helping you hide it." No speech, no performance. Just truth, without decoration. Security arrived a few minutes later, calm and practiced. They spoke to Callahan, then to the venue, then to me. One of them asked if I wanted to file a report for the assault. Assault. A word my family had spent years avoiding. I said yes. Evelyn inhaled sharply behind me, like I had crossed a line. "You would do that to your own son?" she asked. I looked at her. For the first time in years, I didn't try to make my answer gentle. He did it to his own father. There are moments when a person realizes they've lost control of a story they thought they owned. That was hers. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. People stepped out in small groups, speaking in low voices, glancing once in my direction before looking away. Someone said, "I'm sorry," under their breath. Someone else held the door open a second longer than necessary. Mr. Callahan stood beside me for a moment. "Send everything to counsel," he said. "I will." He studied my face briefly. "You should have done this years ago." He wasn't wrong. "I know," I said. The next few weeks were not victory. They were process. Calls, documents, statements, timelines. My notebook moved from my jacket pocket to an attorney's desk, then into a formal evidence file with a label typed in clean black ink. The folders followed. The emails, the transfers.
the guarantees that had been rewritten in rooms I wasn't invited into. Northline, Red Finch, Gray Harbor, Larchmont. Names that had once sounded like progress. Now they read like a record of slow theft. I answered questions I should have asked years earlier. I corrected dates I had once ignored. I signed my name on pages that finally said, in clear language, what had been happening all along. A young associate asked me why I had waited. "Because they were my family," I said. He paused. Then he nodded. That was enough. Meridian Bridge didn't collapse in a single moment. It thinned, then cracked, then separated in places too small to notice until they connected. Funding paused, accounts reviewed, counsel letters sent. Vanessa filed to protect her assets before the marriage was even recorded. Claire stopped calling me when something broke. Evelyn sent one message. "You've destroyed this family." I read it once. Then I looked at the kitchen counter. The plate I had brought home from the wedding sat there, wrapped in a napkin I hadn't bothered to unfold that night. A piece of cake, slightly crushed, the frosting pressed flat where something heavier had rested on top of it. Food. That was what they said it was about. I unwrapped it slowly, took a fork, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't ask whether I should. I ate. Not because I was proving anything. Because I was hungry.
Because I was allowed to be. That was the part no one in that room had ever understood. A month later, I packed the rest of the notebook into a cardboard evidence box. It didn't feel like losing something. It felt like setting down a weight I had been carrying so long I forgot what standing straight felt like. I kept one page. Monday, Claire sink leak. Tuesday, Elliot lender packet. Wednesday, Evelyn pharmacy. Friday, school pickup. Nothing criminal, nothing dramatic. Just the quiet map of a man disappearing piece by piece. I folded it and placed it in the drawer beside my bed, not to punish myself, but to remember how easy it is to confuse being needed with being valued. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments what you would have done in Harold's place. Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have let the room hear the truth? If you want more stories where silence finally breaks and hidden records change everything, subscribe and stay with this channel. And when you're ready, watch the next story. Because sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one holding the only proof that matters. What I remember most is not the punch, it's the plate. It's the way 400 people watched a man be reduced to an appetite, and how quickly that story fell apart when someone finally asked for proof. They said I ate too much. They were right. I just wasn't eating food. I was consuming every excuse they gave me, every quiet demand, every moment I told myself this was what love looked like. And the night I stopped was the night they had nothing left to feed me. These days, when the phone rings before breakfast, I let it ring. I make coffee first. I sit down. I eat. Then I decide if the voice on the other end is calling because something is broken, or because they finally realized I am no longer the man who fixes it for them.